Today we're going to discuss how to trim these casts. After you've done your second pour, you're obviously going to have a lot of plaster and stone down here that we need to get rid of. The tendency is just to put this on the model trimmer and not pay attention to the landmarks that we need to keep. When you start this, you're probably going to have to, because you've got such a large glob of plaster here, you're probably going to have to rough trim the posterior first to try to get something flat on this back side. So push it into your model trimmer, just push it in the back here and trim this off a little bit to get it flat. Then we'll take this and we'll set it up, and we're going to run it against the, sitting on the bottom, we're going to run it against the model trimmer to make this flat. I'm sorry, I got my hands in the way, to make this side flat. What you need to do when you're doing that is a couple things you have to remember. One is we want to keep it parallel to our occlusal ridge. In other words, we don't want it trimmed like this or sideways. So try to keep this flat base here parallel to occlusal ridge. Another thing to keep in mind is the thickness of the whole base. We don't want it really thick, we don't want it over trimmed. The thickness should be from the middle here to the back side, the middle here should be about 16 millimeters. What you'll do is you'll take your Bowley gauge and you're going to measure the thickness through here. Just see if I get my hands correct here. Measure it this way. I don't have a Bowley gauge, but that's what I do. I'd measure this thickness here. We want to keep that about 16 millimeters, and that's on the upper and the lower cast. So okay, so now we've got the base trimmed. We've got it so we can go flat against it. Now what we need to do is we need to trim the edges around the side. You want to make sure that this corner here is perpendicular. In other words, it's going to be vertical sides straight up all the way around. Okay, so you'll put this on the base here. We're going to trim around, all the way around, and a couple things. Once again, you're not just trimming this, you have to think about what you're doing ahead of time. Is we need to keep a land area. The land area is this area right in here that's above the vestibule. And we'll go into detail later on why you need to keep that. If you over trim it, you're going to have to re-impress and re-pour, so don't over trim it. Keep this about 3 to 4 millimeters wide, this edge here, and you want to, you will have about a 3 to 4 millimeter depth of your vestibule. So trim it like that all the way around, and when you're done, have us check it to make sure we've got enough trimming. The mandibular cast will basically be the same way. Switch these out here. With the mandibular cast, the difference is going to be we have a tongue in here. Now on your art you don't have that, but in the patient's mouth obviously we have a tongue here. So what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to flatten this area out, and once again the thickness there will be about 16 millimeters. Okay. Now we have our trimmed, basically our diagnostic casts, our primary casts from primary impression. We have to mark these in order to make a custom tray for our final impression. First thing we're going to do is we're going to look for certain landmarks. One is on the maxillary cast, we're going to look for the hammer notch, which is right here. Mark it in red. Do the same thing here. It's the most posterior, mark it in red. And then also the fovea. This is on the maxillary cast. You'll find 2 spots there. Mark those. We're going to use those for later on. On the mandibular cast, we're going to find our retromolar pad on both sides, and we're going to make a red circle around both of those so we know where those are. Okay, once you've done that, take a black pencil and go to the distal part of your retromolar pad and go down all the way down to the depth of the fold all the way around. You can see here we have a little frenum, so we have to come up a little bit above that. Go all the way around the fold. When you get to the posterior part, go behind your retromolar pad and draw it straight down, and then the depth of the fold, once again, all the way around. On the maxillary arch, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to go the hammer notch. Now that red line and black line are going to be the same. Go across that, go all the way down, depth of the fold, come around our frenums, go all the way around. Here's a little double frenum. Go all the way around and back up to the hammer notch. And we're going to go straight across on the posterior. That's the depth. That's close to where the distal margin of the denture will be. Okay, once you've done that, we're going to take a blue pencil. Everybody has a blue and red pencil. Take your blue pencil and you want to go 2 to 3 millimeters above this black line and mark it. Now you're going to do this, you're going to follow this black line, the depth of your fold. We're going to make this blue line all the way around. That's going to be the extent of our tray. That's as far as the tray will come down, our custom tray. So it'll be short, about 2 millimeters short of the depth of the fold. Go ahead and draw that all the way around, all the way around on both the upper and the lower. When you get done with that, we'll go to the next step. Okay, now we've got the blue line basically 2 millimeters above the black line all the way around. That's going to be the extent of our tray. I did forget to mention on the posterior of the maxillary, the black and the blue line will be the same line because that's the extent of our tray. We want to make sure it goes back on this far enough. On the mandibular arch, it'll be just about 2 millimeters short of the black line, if you can see it or not. Okay. Now we have to draw in the red line, which is going to be where our wax relief is going to be. That's going to be one layer of wax over the whole arch, just shy basically of our blue line. So we're going to mark, see if I can get this on the camera, mark about 2 millimeters short of this blue line is going to be a red line. Can you see that? Okay, we're going to do that all the way around on the upper and the lower. Now on the maxillary here, this wax line will be short about 2 millimeters in the posterior here. On the lower one, it's going to be the same thing. It's going to be 2 millimeters shy all the way around. And the same thing here, we're going to go 2 millimeters shy across the retromolar pad. When you do that, we'll go on to the next step. Okay, now that we have the red lines all the way around, that's our wax relief. Eventually we're going to put one layer of wax over this. It's going to go right to the red line, and that's where it's going to stop. We'll trim that all off. Then we're going to do a custom tray material, which will go all the way around to the blue line. And that'll be trimmed off there, and that's where that will stop. Okay, for now, before we can do that, we need a couple more things we have to do. We have to put in tissue stops. And what that is basically we need to keep a space between our custom tray and our tissue so that we have the correct thickness of our impression material. The way to do that is, and once we get our wax in here, we're going to cut in a few tissue stops. So on your ridge here, mark an X, basically in the posterior here, and an X over here in the posterior, right on top of the ridge, and one right on top in the anterior. On the mandibular arch, you're going to have a little bit different. On the maxillary arch, we have our palate to help stabilize, but on the mandibular arch, we don't have that. So we're going to do 2 on each side. One there, basically one there, and one here. Now once you get your wax on here, your layer of wax, we're going to cut a little window right out of each of these, a nice square spot on each of those parts of the ridge. And that way your custom tray material, the triad material you're going to use, will go right in through your wax, right onto your cast. So when you make your final impression, it actually gives you a stop against the tissue. Okay, the very last thing we're going to need to do is we need to bevel the edges of these land areas. And you only do this on your diagnostic cast. You don't do it on your final cast. Excuse me. The reason you do that is we're going to light cure this triad material, and the light has to have a way to get in right to the edge, because the lights come in from the side and the top, but you have to be able to have some room for that light to get in. So what you're going to do is you're just going to bevel this ridge right down so it doesn't interfere with the light shining onto your tray material.